The rain fell softly over Tokyo Bay on the morning of June 10, 1942. Inside the Imperial Navy Ministry, the sound of water against glass was the only noise that dared exist. Vice Admiral Mato Magaki sat alone in a windowless room on the third floor, staring at a single sheet of paper. The document bore no official seal, no signature, just typed characters that confirmed what whispers had already begun to spread through the hallways: 4 carriers lost. The Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, gone. He did not crumple the paper. He did not curse. He simply placed it face down on the desk and closed his eyes. Bagaki had spent 28 years in the Imperial Navy. He had studied at Adajima, served aboard destroyers in the freezing waters off Sakhalin, and risen through ranks built on discipline and silence. He had learned early that the Navy did not reward emotion. It rewarded endurance. And so he sat, perfectly still, as the weight of 4 carriers, 4 irreplaceable symbols of Japan's naval supremacy, settled into his chest like stones. Outside, Tokyo continued as if nothing had changed. Streetcars rattled along their tracks. Vendors called out prices for fish and vegetables. Children played in schoolyards, their laughter rising above the hum of the city. The war, for most of them, was something distant, a series of victories announced on the radio, names of islands they could not pronounce, enemies they had never seen. But Agaki knew. And soon, others would know too. The meeting was scheduled for 1,400 hours. No agenda had been circulated. No minutes would be taken. Admiral Osami Nagano, chief of the Naval General Staff, had simply sent word through his aide: attendance required. Discretion absolute. Bagaki arrived early. The conference room was on the 5th floor, a space reserved for discussions that could not be held anywhere else. The walls were bare except for a single map of the Pacific, marked with pins and colored threads that traced supply lines, fleet positions, and zones of control. 6 months ago, those threads had stretched from the Aleutians to the Solomon Islands, from Wake to the Indian Ocean. Now, looking at them, Bagaki felt a strange dissonance, as if the map belonged to a different war, a different nation. One by one, the others arrived. Rear Admiral Ryanosuke Kusaka, who had served as Chief of Staff to Admiral Nagumo during the Midway operation. Captain Yasuji Watanabe, a staff officer known for his meticulous analysis. And finally, Admiral Nagano himself, a man whose face had been carved by decades of service into something unreadable. They sat without greeting one another. Nagano placed a folder on the table but did not open it. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice low and steady, "what I am about to say does not leave this room. It will not be recorded. It will not be repeated. Is that understood?" Nods. Silence. Nagano continued. "The official report states that we lost 4 carriers at Midway due to unfortunate timing and unexpected enemy resistance. The Emperor has been informed. The public will be told that our forces inflicted significant damage on the American fleet and that the operation, while costly, achieved strategic objectives." He paused, letting the words settle. "That is the official report." Kusaka shifted in his seat. Bagaki kept his eyes on the table. "But we are not here to discuss official reports," Nagano said. "We are here to discuss what actually happened. And more importantly, what it means." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, heavy with the things no one wanted to say. Bagaki had spent the past 4 days reading preliminary reports, interviewing survivors, piecing together fragments of a disaster that should never have occurred. He had read accounts of dive bombers appearing out of nowhere, of fires spreading faster than damage control teams could contain them, of men abandoning ships that had been the pride of the combined fleet. But numbers and reports could not capture the truth. The truth was simpler, and far more terrible. "We lost the war at Midway," Kusaka said quietly. The words hung in the air like smoke. No one contradicted him. Watanabe leaned forward, his hands folded on the table. "Not the war," he said carefully. "But the initiative. The momentum. The belief that we were invincible." "Belief," Nagano repeated, as if tasting the word. Yes. That is what we lost. Bugaki finally spoke. The carriers cannot be replaced. Not in a year. Not in 2 years. The Americans are building new ones every month. We are not. It was a fact everyone in the room already knew, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that reports and briefings never could. The Empire of Japan, for all its discipline and sacrifice, could not match the industrial capacity of the United States. It had never been able to. The entire strategy, the lightning strikes, the rapid expansion, the hope of forcing a negotiated peace, had depended on maintaining superiority long enough to make continued American resistance seem futile. Midway had shattered that illusion. Admiral Yamamoto believes we can still win, Kusaka said, though his tone suggested he did not share that belief. Nagano's expression did not change. Admiral Yamamoto is a brilliant strategist. But brilliance cannot build carriers. It cannot train pilots we no longer have. It cannot change the fact that we are now fighting a defensive war we were never prepared to fight. The rain outside had stopped. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, casting long shadows across the table. Bugaki watched those shadows and thought about the men who had died at Midway, pilots who had trained for years, sailors who had believed in the mission, officers who had followed orders without question. They had done everything right. And it had not mattered. What do we tell the fleet? Watanabe asked. Nagano finally opened the folder. Inside were photographs, grainy images taken from reconnaissance planes. Burning carriers. Oil slicks stretching for miles. Debris floating on dark water. We tell them nothing, Nagano said. We tell them to prepare for the next operation. We tell them that sacrifice is the highest honor. We tell them what they need to hear to keep fighting. And what do we tell ourselves? Bugaki asked. Nagano looked at him for a long moment. Then he closed the folder. We tell ourselves the truth. That we are now in a war we cannot win. And that our duty is to fight it anyway. The meeting ended without ceremony. The men stood, bowed slightly, and left one by one. Bugaki was the last to go. He paused at the door and looked back at the map on the wall, the threads and pins that marked an empire stretching across half the Pacific. It was still there. All of it. The islands, the bases, the supply lines. Nothing had changed on the map. But everything had changed. Bugaki walked down the empty corridor, his footsteps echoing against polished floors. Somewhere below, clerks typed reports. Aides answered telephones. Officers studied charts and planned operations. The machinery of war continued, as it always did. But in that windowless room on the 3rd floor, in the silence that followed the meeting, something had shifted. Not a decision. Not a plan. Just a quiet, unspoken acknowledgement that the war they had imagined, the war they had prepared for, was over. And the war they would actually fight had just begun. 3 weeks had passed since the meeting in the windowless room. Vice Admiral Agaki had returned to his duties with the practiced efficiency of a man who had learned to compartmentalize grief. He reviewed operational plans, attended briefings, signed orders that sent ships and men to positions across the Pacific. The rhythm of military routine was a mercy. It demanded focus, left little room for reflection. But at night, alone in his quarters, the numbers haunted him. 4 carriers lost. 110 aircraft destroyed. Over 3,000 men dead. And on the American side, 1 carrier sunk, the Yorktown. Losses they could absorb. Losses they had already absorbed. The arithmetic was simple. Brutal. Undeniable. Japan had entered the war with 10 fleet carriers. The Americans had 7. Now Japan had 6. The Americans still had 6, and their shipyards were launching new ones at a pace that made Agaki's chest tighten every time he read the intelligence reports. The Essex-class program alone would produce 17 carriers. 17. Japan's entire naval aviation program could not train enough pilots to crew the carriers they already had, let alone new ones. He sat at his desk, a cup of cold tea beside him, and wrote in his private journal, a practice he had maintained since his days as a junior officer. The journal was not for posterity. It was for clarity. A place to think on paper, away from the careful language of official reports. June 28, 1942. We speak of honor and sacrifice, but war is not won by honor. It is won by steel and oil and time. We have courage. The Americans have factories. He paused, pen hovering over paper. How long can courage fight arithmetic? The next morning, Ogaki was summoned to the Naval General Staff Building. No explanation given. Just a terse message delivered by a junior officer who bowed and left before questions could be asked. When he arrived, he found Admiral Nagano waiting in the same conference room. But this time, they were not alone. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, the man who had warned the government that Japan could run wild for 6 months to a year, but no more. 6 months had passed. Yamamoto did not stand when Ogaki entered. He simply gestured to a chair. "Sit, Ogaki. We have much to discuss." Ogaki bowed and took his seat. Nagano was reviewing a document, his face drawn. The room felt smaller than it had 3 weeks ago, as if the walls had moved closer. Yamamoto spoke first. "I have read your preliminary analysis of Midway. It is thorough, honest, painful." He paused. "And correct." Ogaki said nothing. Praise from Yamamoto was rare, but it carried weight. "The question before us now," Yamamoto continued, "is not whether we made mistakes at Midway. We did. The question is whether those mistakes were tactical errors that can be corrected, or strategic. Fundamental. Irreversible." Nagano set down the document. "The Emperor has asked for a frank assessment. Not propaganda. Not reassurance. Truth." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Yamamoto leaned back in his chair. "So let us speak truth. Ogaki, you have studied the Americans. You have read their doctrine, analyzed their production capacity. Tell me, can we win this war?" It was the question every officer had been avoiding. The question that could not be asked in official meetings, could not be written in reports, could not be spoken aloud without risking accusations of defeatism. But here, in this room, with these men, the question demanded an answer. Ogaki chose his words carefully. "If victory means forcing the Americans to negotiate a peace that allows us to retain our territorial gains, no. We cannot win." Silence. "If victory means preventing an American invasion of the home islands and maintaining a defensive perimeter until their political will collapses, perhaps. But only if we fight perfectly. And we have already proven we cannot fight perfectly." Yamamoto nodded slowly. "Go on." "The Americans lost 300 men at Midway," Ogaki said. "We lost 3,000. They lost 1 carrier. We lost 4. But the true loss is not in the numbers. It is in what those numbers represent." He stood and walked to the map on the wall, the same map he had studied 3 weeks ago. His finger traced the line from Tokyo to Midway. "We extended ourselves too far. We divided our forces. We assumed the Americans would react as we predicted. Every assumption was wrong." He turned back to face them. "And now we are reacting to them. We are responding to their moves. We have lost the initiative." Nagano's jaw tightened. "Then what do you propose?" "I propose we acknowledge reality," Ogaki said. "We cannot replace the carriers. We cannot train pilots fast enough. We cannot match their production. Every month we continue this war, the balance shifts further in their favor." "You are suggesting surrender," Nagano said, his voice cold. "I am suggesting we consider what we are actually fighting for," Ogaki replied. "If we are fighting to preserve the empire, then we must ask whether continuing this war will achieve that goal, or destroy it." Yamamoto raised a hand, silencing the tension before it could escalate. Bugaki is not wrong. But he is also not entirely right. He stood and joined Agaki at the map. His finger moved across the Pacific, touching islands, tracing routes. We cannot win a war of attrition. That much is clear. But we are not yet in a position to negotiate. The Americans will not accept terms while they believe they can achieve total victory. And after Midway, they believe exactly that. Then what do we do? Bugaki asked. Yamamoto's expression was grim. We make them doubt. We make every island cost them blood. We make every mile of ocean a graveyard. We do not win. We make them question whether winning is worth the price. The meeting continued for hours. They discussed defensive strategies, resource allocation, the possibility of holding key positions in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea. They spoke in the language of military planning, operational objectives, logistical constraints, force projections. But beneath the technical language, Bugaki heard something else. A quiet resignation. An acknowledgement that they were no longer planning for victory. They were planning for survival. For delay. For a future that grew darker with each passing month. When the meeting finally ended, Yamamoto asked Agaki to stay behind. They stood alone in the conference room, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the map. You think I am prolonging the inevitable, Yamamoto said. It was not a question. I think you are doing your duty, Bugaki replied carefully. Yamamoto smiled, a sad, weary expression. I told them this would happen. Before Pearl Harbor, I told the Prime Minister that we could not win a prolonged war with America. I told them we had 6 months. Perhaps a year. And now? He gestured at the map. Now we are in month 7. And I am still giving orders. Still planning operations. Still sending men to die for a cause I know is lost. Then why continue? Bugaki asked. Yamamoto turned to face him. Because the alternative is surrender. And Japan is not ready to surrender. The people are not ready. The military is not ready. The emperor is not ready. He paused. So we fight. Not because we can win. But because we are not yet ready to lose. Bugaki felt something shift inside him, not agreement, exactly, but understanding. This was the burden of command. Not the glory of victory, but the weight of impossible choices. How long? Bugaki asked quietly. How long do we fight a war we cannot win? Yamamoto looked at the map for a long moment. Until the arithmetic becomes undeniable. Until even the most loyal officer, the most devoted soldier, can see that continued resistance means the destruction of everything we claim to be protecting. And when will that be? I do not know, Yamamoto said. But I fear we will know it when we see it. That night, Bugaki returned to his quarters and opened his journal. He wrote for an hour, the words flowing faster than usual, as if something inside him had broken loose. July 2nd, 1942. We are fighting a war we know we cannot win, for reasons we can no longer articulate, toward an end we cannot imagine. And yet we continue. Is this courage? Or is it something else? Something darker? At Midway, we lost 4 carriers. But we lost something more. We lost the belief that our will could overcome their resources. We lost the illusion that sacrifice alone could change the arithmetic of steel and oil and time. And now we are left with a question no one dares to ask. What do we do when duty demands we fight a war that reason tells us is already lost? He set down his pen and stared at the words. Then, carefully, he closed the journal and locked it in his desk drawer. Outside, Tokyo slept. The streetcars were silent. The vendors had gone home. The children were in their beds, dreaming of a future their leaders could no longer promise. And in a windowless room on the 3rd floor of the Naval Ministry, the map of the Pacific remained unchanged, threads and pins marking an empire that, in the quiet acknowledgement of its admirals, had already begun to fall. August 17, 1942. 2 months and 13 days since Midway. Vice Admiral Agaki stood on the deck of the battleship Yamato, anchored in Truck Lagoon. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of copper and gold. Around him, the combined fleet lay at rest, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and the remaining carriers, their silhouettes dark against the fading light. It should have been a sight of power, of strength. Instead, Ugaki saw absence. For empty spaces where carriers should have been. Pilots who would never return. A fleet that was no longer hunting, but waiting. He had come to truck at Admiral Yamamoto's request. No formal orders, just a quiet message, "Join me. We need to talk." Ugaki descended the ladder to the Admiral's cabin. The door was open. Inside, Yamamoto sat at his desk, a chessboard before him. He was playing against himself, a habit Ugaki had observed before. The Admiral would set up a position, study it from one side, then walk around the table and study it from the other. "Do you play, Ugaki?" Yamamoto asked without looking up. "Poorly, sir." "Then you understand strategy better than most." Yamamoto moved a piece, a bishop, sliding diagonally across the board. Chess is about seeing the board as your opponent sees it. Understanding not just your own position, but theirs. Their strengths. Their options. Their inevitable moves. He gestured to the chair across from him. Ugaki sat. "I have been studying the American position," Yamamoto continued. "Their production reports. Their fleet movements. Their strategic priorities." He moved another piece, a pawn, advancing slowly. "And I have reached a conclusion." He looked up, meeting Ugaki's eyes. "We are going to lose this war. Not eventually. Not possibly. Certainly." The words were spoken without emotion, as if he were commenting on the weather. But their weight was absolute. Ugaki said nothing. There was nothing to say. He had known this for weeks. But hearing it from Yamamoto, the architect of Japan's early victories, the man who had struck Pearl Harbor, made it final. "The question," Yamamoto continued, "is no longer whether we can win. It is how we lose. And what remains when the losing is done." Over the next hour, Yamamoto laid out what he had been thinking. Not plans, exactly. Not strategies. Just observations. Calculations. The arithmetic of defeat. "The Americans are landing at Guadalcanal," he said. "A small island. Strategically insignificant. And yet we must respond. Because if we do not, they will take another island. And another. And each island brings them closer to the home islands." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the fleet. "We will fight them at Guadalcanal. We will send ships and planes and men. And we will lose. Perhaps not immediately. Perhaps we will win a battle or two. But in the end, we will lose. Because they can replace their losses. And we cannot. Then why fight?" Ugaki asked. Yamamoto turned back to him. "Because the alternative is to surrender now. And Japan is not ready for that. The people still believe we are winning. The military still believes sacrifice can change the outcome. The emperor still believes in the divine protection of the nation. And you, sir? What do you believe?" Yamamoto was silent for a long moment. Then he returned to the chessboard. He picked up the Black King, his own piece, and held it in his palm. "I believe that we are fighting a war we should never have started. Against an enemy we should never have challenged. For goals we could never achieve." He set the king back on the board. "And I believe that my duty is to fight it anyway. Not because I can win. But because I am a Japanese officer. And that is what Japanese officers do." Ugaki felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear. Not despair. Just certainty. The kind of certainty that comes when all illusions have been stripped away, and only truth remains. "How long?" he asked quietly. 3 years, Yamamoto said. "Perhaps 4. The Americans will take the Solomons. Then the Gilberts. Then the Marshalls. Then the Marianas. Each step will cost them blood. Each step will take time. But they will take them. And when they reach the Marianas, they will be close enough to bomb Tokyo. And then... He paused. Then the war will end. One way or another. Invasion? Perhaps. Or something else. The Americans are developing new weapons. We have intelligence reports. Rumors. Nothing concrete. But if even half of what we hear is true... He shook his head. We may not survive to see an invasion. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the sun had fully set. The fleet was now just a collection of shadows on dark water. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang, the watch changing, the rhythm of naval life continuing as it always had. "Why did you ask me here, sir?" Bugaki finally asked. Yamamoto looked at him with an expression that might have been sadness. Or exhaustion. Or both. "Because you understand. Because you have looked at the numbers and reached the same conclusion I have. And because I needed to say these things aloud. To someone who would not report me for defeatism. To someone who would simply listen." He stood and walked to a cabinet, retrieving a bottle of sake and 2 small cups. He poured carefully, the liquid catching the lamplight. "A toast," he said, handing 1 cup to Agaki. "To the war we are fighting. And to the men who will die in it, believing it matters." Agaki took the cup. They drank in silence. The sake was good. Smooth. A luxury in a time of rationing. Bugaki wondered how much longer such luxuries would exist. How much longer anything would exist as it had been. "What will you tell the fleet?" he asked. "I will tell them to fight," Yamamoto said. "I will tell them that every battle matters. That every sacrifice brings us closer to victory. I will tell them what they need to hear to keep going." "And what will you tell yourself?" Yamamoto set down his cup. "I will tell myself that I did my duty. That I followed orders. That I served my emperor and my nation to the best of my ability." He paused. "And I will hope that history judges me less harshly than I judge myself." 3 days later, Agaki returned to Tokyo. The city had changed in subtle ways. Fewer young men on the streets. More women in factories. Ration lines growing longer. The war was no longer something distant. It was here. Present. Undeniable. He went directly to the Naval Ministry. The building was busier than usual, officers moving with purpose, clerks carrying stacks of documents, telephones ringing in every office. The machinery of war, operating at full capacity. But Agaki knew what they did not. That all this activity, all this effort, was not building toward victory. It was simply delaying defeat. He climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor and entered the windowless room where it had all begun. The room where Admiral Nagano had first spoken the truth aloud. The room where the illusion had shattered. The map was still there. The threads and pins marking an empire that stretched across the Pacific. But now, looking at it, Agaki saw something different. Not territory. Not power. Just distance. Miles and miles of ocean that would have to be defended. Islands that would have to be held. Supply lines that would have to be maintained. All of it impossible. He sat at the table and opened his journal. He had not written in it since the night after meeting with Yamamoto. Now, the words came slowly, carefully, as if he were carving them into stone. August 20th, 1942. I have seen the future. Not in visions or prophecies, but in numbers. In production reports and casualty lists and the cold arithmetic of industrial war. We will fight at Guadalcanal. We will fight in New Guinea. We will fight at every island between here and Tokyo. And we will lose. Not because our men lack courage. Not because our officers lack skill. But because courage and skill cannot defeat factories. Admiral Yamamoto knows this. Admiral Nagano knows this. And now I know this. But we will not speak it aloud. We will not write it in reports. We will not tell the men who are about to die that their deaths will not change the outcome. We will fight. Because that is what we do. Because that is what duty demands. And when it is over, when the last island has fallen, when the last ship has been sunk, when the last pilot has flown his final mission, perhaps someone will ask why we continued. Why we did not stop when we knew we could not win. And the answer will be simple, because we were not ready to accept what we already knew. He closed the journal and sat in silence. Outside, Tokyo continued. The streetcars rattled. The vendors called. The children played. Life went on, as it always did, unaware that the men in windowless rooms had already calculated its end. Bugaki stood and walked to the window, the one window in the building that faced west, toward the Pacific. Somewhere out there, American carriers were steaming toward Guadalcanal. American factories were building new ships. American pilots were training for missions that would bring them closer and closer to this very city. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. The realization did not bring panic. It did not bring despair. It brought something quieter. Something heavier. Certainty. The war was lost. It had been lost at Midway. Perhaps it had been lost before that, at Pearl Harbor, when they had awakened a nation they could never defeat. Perhaps it had been lost the moment they chose to fight at all. But it was lost. And now, all that remained was the fighting. The dying. The slow, inevitable march toward an end they could see but could not prevent. Bugaki turned from the window and left the room. He walked down the corridor, past officers who saluted, past clerks who bowed, past all the machinery of a military that was still pretending it could win. And in that moment, walking through the halls of the Naval Ministry, Vice Admiral Mato Magaki carried with him the heaviest burden an officer can bear. The knowledge that every order he gave, every plan he approved, every man he sent into battle, all of it was in service of a war that was already over. Not in the newspapers. Not in the official reports. Not in the speeches or the propaganda or the promises of final victory. But in the quiet, private acknowledgement of the men who knew the numbers. The war was over. And the dying had only just begun.